New. All right, is there anyone who still needs a paper? Still needs a paper. I've got a couple there. You need one for your mom too. Eric, you gonna be in with us? Sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and pass out the roll call book. If you don't mind to mark yourself in, just note that you're here. If you do not see your name on the page, check the next page. If it's not on any of them, write it in, please. We will have to be very timely today. This is the longest lesson we've had thus far. And so as we get the music to go down, in the back potentially. Can I have the music down, please? That's okay. Thank you. All right, so due to the fact that this is the longest lesson that we're going to have throughout the class, we have got to get started. If you've been in here with me thus far, most of my lessons are 4, maybe 5 pages. This one is about 5 full pages and into a 6th one. So we will have to keep moving forward. So real quick, I think I see a couple more people in. Does anybody else need some of these? Yep. All right. How are you guys doing today? You know, I had a speaker at a kids camp I went to, and they asked all the kids at once, and they said, "What's your favorite thing for the week?" And everybody said a different answer. That's basically what just happened. So I heard good, awesome, then I heard so hopefully you guys will forgive me if I didn't hear your specific answer on that one. We're not doing too bad. I've got like 5 of these left, and I know at least 2 more people that I think I will see here coming up in a minute. Just a quick note as we get going. Today is the potluck at the East Steps house. So if you said you were coming, if you signed up to bring something, I'd love to have you out there. If you didn't sign up and weren't here, I think if you bring something, you'd probably still be okay. But just throwing that out there. Love to have you guys come out. We'll enjoy one another's company. They have a beautiful home that we'll be meeting in. And I'm going to give you guys the address for that if you plan to come out. So just, if that is you, you may want to ready a pen or a phone or whatever you got. So the address we're looking at is 1700 River Ridge Drive, okay? 1700 River Ridge Drive. That is in Spring Valley. So, love to have you. Love to spend some time with you guys, talking with you. Get to not just talk at you, but interact a little more. It'd be great. So, potluck. Got to start. Address. I don't know anything else. Okay, we have to get to the lesson then. So lesson 10, this is the second to last lesson. We are covering 2 chapters this week. This is chapters 48 and 49. Who did the reading this week? Who read 48 and 49? Thank you, I appreciate it. So next week, guess what chapter we're on? 50, all right. So that'll be the last one, and then the following week we will start the wilderness wanderings if you're in here. If you've picked a different life group, you're welcome to do that as well. But we're going to start probably with the Exodus and then the time they're in the wilderness. So if you're interested in that, we'd love to have you. But today, this lesson is called Blessings and Prophecies. They didn't have very many fruitful bows I could pick from, so a fruitful bowl it was. Hopefully somebody got that. Today we will be covering the blessings upon Joseph's children and each of the children of Israel. So both and. That's how that works. So everyone knows either Jeremiah 29:11 or Philippians 4:13. Does anyone know off the top of their head Philippians 4:13? All right, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Jeremiah 29:11, roughly put, is I know the plans that I have for you. Plans to throw my microphone. Something tells me that was not in there. Plans to, benefit you, to strengthen you. He talks about essentially I'm helping you, but what everyone forgets about both of those verses is the context. So when people stand up and quote, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, they're talking about like winning a football game, and Jesus is talking about being able to, abound while having nothing. Jesus is talking about how to have satisfaction without things, and people unfortunately apply it very widely. So I almost got a coffee mug that says I can do all things through a verse taken out of context. So maybe one day I'll buy it and I'll wear it or drink it, or hopefully not wear it. Either way, in the Bible, we have to make sure we understand not everything is written directly to us, but is still applicable for us. We have to understand how that works. These things were written for our admonition. They're written for us to learn. And I don't know about you guys, I've never really sat and read through Genesis 49 and been like, I have things that I can take away for my benefit in this. But there are some, and we're going to talk about those. As you read through the blessings of these men, their curses, their prophecies of the future, I want you really to do some self-reflection, and we'll get to that at the conclusion the most. So the first thing we're going to look at is the blessings of Joseph's sons. This is chapter 48. This is chapter 48. So the first thing under that is Joseph brought, not brow, his sons to be blessed of his father. So somebody read Genesis 48, verse 1. Loud, please. Go ahead. All right, verse 2. Now, I appreciate that it says Israel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed. The man is 147 years old. If he could move like a spry chicken, I'd feel really bad about myself. But we see, first off, that Joseph wanted to visit his father on the notice that he had bad health. He, is already 147 years old, but, your father's sick. Okay, it'd be a good time to go visit him. Let's make sure we're not missing those opportunities. As we go through life, we need to make the most of the opportunities we can to see loved ones when we can. I'm going to hopefully go see my grandparents before too long. My grandmother has had kind of rough health the last couple of years. My mom's been taking care of her and spending time up there. But when we have opportunity, let's make sure we don't neglect that, which is very easy to do. Second thing I want to see is Jacob begins by recounting the blessings of God upon him in Luz. So Genesis 48:3, somebody read it. Verse 4. Sam? All right, he said, I'll make you a multitude of people. I'll give the land to your seed for an everlasting possession. So God Almighty is the covenant name given to the patriarchs. I know when we think about God in the Old Testament, you probably are very familiar with the term Jehovah or Yahweh, probably based upon the many groups that will show up at your house and tell you his name is Jehovah and how dare you call him something else. But that is actually the most used name of God in the Bible, but the early patriarchs didn't know God as Jehovah. They knew God as God Almighty. That was what they originally were told his name was. They would follow him under that name in a lot of ways. And so that's how they knew him. He said, so God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz. Luz is Bethel. If you're familiar, Luz actually means almond tree because it was a place that had a lot of almonds. And Bethel means house of God. So it was a place where he had an interaction with God. And he said, I didn't realize where I was holy ground. This is the very house of God. And so this is where he saw the angels in the nighttime ascending and descending from a ladder and God at the top speaking to him. If you're familiar with this or not, it is in Genesis chapter 28. So if you'd like to read about it at some point, you can. This is when he's on his way to go see his mom's family and find a wife and run away from his brother because he just stole his birthright. So, trying to not pay for his mistakes. But that's what's going on there. But he notes he's about to give this blessing based upon the fact that God has blessed him. So Jacob ascribes Ephraim and Manasseh unto himself. This is another really interesting thing we need to know. Genesis 48, verse 5. Somebody read it loud, please. So he said, your sons, which are his grandsons, are mine as much as my very own sons are. Which is very, very important. Because no one else's kids gets land in the children of Israel. No one else gets an inheritance like Manasseh and Ephraim do, being grandchildren. Verse 6. Yeah. He says, the rest of them can be yours. These two are mine. Verse 7. it says, "And as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died in the land of Canaan in the way. But yet there was but a little way that to come to Ephrath, and I buried her in the land of Ephrath, the same as Bethlehem." And so this reference would be that these sons would get their possessions directly from Israel. That's what he's trying to get across. Some commentators believe the reference to Rachel in verse 7 is saying that ultimately the reasoning behind one of the reasons he's giving extra care and attention to these grandkids is because Rachel is the favorite wife, or she was. And that way her line has more land and more ability to it. It also must be noted that Reuben's birthright has been taken. So if you guys are familiar with the birthright, if you have 2 kids and there's a birthright, one kid will get 2/3 of the property and the other kid will get 1/3, because they'd actually break it into thirds and then give an extra piece to the person with the birthright. So because Reuben does not get that, there is room for someone else. And if you're also familiar, Levi does not get any specific land. That leaves 2 spots, and the spots are filled up by Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's kids. All right, now they have to take that birthright in order for them to be counted. So Jacob rejoices in the blessings of God, Genesis 48, 8 through 12. Somebody read verse 8. I believe in you. Someone. See, that was the hardest one yet. All right, verse 9, it says, "And Joseph said unto his father, These are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, Bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them." Now, you may be like, why is he asking that? Didn't he just say he was going to take them to himself? What's going on? Well, verse 10 might give you a little answer to that. Somebody read verse 10. Yeah, so he's an older man, 147. You know, his eyes are starting to go out a little bit. He can't see exactly who's with him. Maybe he can see that somebody's there, but he doesn't know who it is and what's going on. It says, "And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed." So he's looking back at how blessed he is, even when he didn't think he would be. Verse 12. Somebody read verse 12. Yes, ma'am, right there. Yeah, so when I originally read that, I'm like, okay, well, these have got to be very small children at that point. Not necessarily. It's when it says between his knees, he doesn't mean like they fit between his legs. What he means is they had come and they were standing before their grandfather. Because remember, he just embraced and loved on them, and he pulled them away for a second. And part of the reason he's doing that is he's trying to now order them in the direction that he wants them to get blessed. Because who normally gets blessed in these families? Who gets the better blessing? The firstborn, the oldest one. Yeah. So he pulls them away. He's going to have them moved so they can be blessed. Says, Jacob seemed to finally understand the importance of seeing life as a whole as a blessing from God. I mean, think about how he responded when he talked to Pharaoh 17 years earlier. He got in at 130 years old, and this is what he said. Forgive my weird spacing. It wouldn't let me fix it. I tried really hard. It said, "And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days and the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of my life." Man, God has blessed me is a big difference from few and evil are the days of my life. His perspective is changing over this time. He said he'd not attained to the years of his fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So it should not be lost on anyone that Jacob finds himself like his father did in his old age. If you're familiar with Genesis 27:1, when he stole his brother's blessing, his father was older and he had lost his sight. And that's how he was able to steal his brother's blessing, is he dressed up in furs because his brother was so hairy, and he went and pretended to be Esau. And so now he's at the point where he can't see, and his son is bringing his sons before him to be blessed. So there may be some recollections of his earlier life going on right in these moments. So we see those things going on. Jacob rejoices in God's blessing in the way that he's made this all work out. Jacob, in God's place, gives the blessing to the younger person. So this happens in verses 14 through 20. For the sake of space, I did not give you all those verses. If you'd like to look at them, you can. I'm going to talk about some of the things that happen in them, though. Israel places his right hand on the younger sibling's head. If you're familiar with the story, what he did is his dad is older, and he can't barely see, and so he pulled the sons back. He made sure they were in the right order, so the kid that he wanted the right hand to go on would be right in front of him. But instead, what he does is he puts his hand on the younger person's head. And I don't know if he does this or if he does this and then this, but somehow Joseph notices it. So he puts his right hand on the younger sibling's head. This actually offends Joseph. It offends Joseph because he thought maybe, Jacob just was, getting real out there and didn't know what he was doing. But Jacob says, no, surely Ephraim will be the more blessed one. Now, if you've ever looked at a map of the children of Israel, it doesn't look that way on a map. Ephraim is like this big, and Manasseh's got 2 whole sections. And so it sounds like a weird statement, but we'll get to that here in a few. Does anybody else find it ironic that he didn't want the younger son to get the blessing? I mean, think about who he's been his whole life. He was the youngest son. He was going to be obeyed by his siblings. He was going to be the one who was tattling on them all the time. He was the one who, had dreams of his dad bowing down to him. But he's like, no, don't you dare let the younger son be in charge. Like, what is this? Don't give him the blessing. So it's kind of ironic that he got so offended by that. Ephraim, at the same time, though, because we talked about that, Ephraim is the one who'll be more blessed. If you're familiar later in the Bible, Ephraim becomes a cover name for Israel. There are times when it'll say, but Ephraim did this, and it's not talking about just the little tiny group Ephraim. It's actually talking about all of Israel. And so sometimes Ephraim is referenced in every single tribe of the northern 10. God also blesses Joseph in this section. Jacob, as do other patriarchs, reference some experience in what happened to them and how they were blessed. But it'd be interesting to note he references God and an angel. You have to understand these people did not have a full understanding of God's complexity in Trinitarian terms. So all he knew is there's God and then there's this messenger person who's leading him the right way and that he may have wrestled with in the desert places. But at the same time, if you go back to that, he calls it Peniel because he says, I've been face to face with God. And sometimes you'll see people reference an angel of God as God. And you're like, how in the world does that happen? Well, angels are not God. Can we agree with that? All right. But in the Old Testament, who is normally the angel of the Lord? Jesus Christ, who is God. And so they don't know necessarily all that information. So we can't look back at them and be mad at them for things they don't know. But what we do know is today, if you understand Jesus to be an angel, you're off. Because we have further revelation. We know that, there's obviously God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. But we know Jesus did not take on the form of angels, as said Hebrews. Had to be one reference, sorry. Jacob foretells the return to Canaan. So he ends chapter 48. Jacob tells Joseph that God will surely remove them from the land later and bring them back to Canaan. Jacob has already, requested that, he doesn't stay there. He's already had a vision that God was going to do this, and he gives that information to Joseph. He notes that Joseph will be given one portion above his brethren, note that both of his sons have an inheritance. There are 2 tribes of Joseph. The other thing to note, if you ever read through the 12 tribes of Israel, sometimes one of them is left out. And it's not always the same one. Sometimes it's Dan, sometimes it's this one or that one. But it's just one of those things when it references the 12 tribes, because there are technically more than 12 people, because you've got Ephraim and Manasseh, Levi, Reuben. I mean, you've got at least 13 people. Sometimes when it references the 12 tribes, it just doesn't mention one. And some of that is just the stipulations of all of it, because, Levi doesn't have his own stuff, and Reuben would have had a birthright and doesn't, and things like that. So then we move into chapter 49. And if you guys were really well versed in this, I'm proud of you. I was not. I was telling someone on the way in, I realized in studying this section there are a lot of things I didn't understand or didn't know. When I first read through it, I thought there was something really cool in Joseph's line, but it was a misreading on my end, so I'm glad I didn't tell you guys weeks ago, and that's why we study these things. But we're going to look at the blessing of the tribes of Israel. So Jacob's blessings are to bless the kids, but also to tell the future. They're not just blessings. Some of them are prophetic. They tell what's going to be, which is kind of interesting. He would have been one of the first human prophets that just come forth and tell you this is what God's going to do. And he doesn't do it very extensively, and he doesn't even have all the information long enough to explain it all. Some of these things these people will not understand for, their whole lives. But it didn't make it not true. So he starts working through the list. The first one will be Reuben. We're going to read those verses, 49 verses 3 and 4. Some to read verse 3. Carolyn? Yep, he said, beginning of my strength, excellency of dignity and power. Verse 4. Sure. Okay, so it doesn't mean he peed the bed. Clarifying. Reuben, being the firstborn, was to be Jacob's excellency, his strength. But instead, what he did is he slept with his mother-in-law. If you're familiar with the passage in Genesis 35, he went up to lay with one of his father's wives. Specifically, I think it was the mother of Dan. Don't quote me on that. But he went and did something he should not have done. The law would call that uncovering his father's nakedness. So Reuben was not then given the role of being the social and priestly leader, which he would have potentially been given if it were not for this immorality. So there's a good lesson behind this. Spurgeon said, "So a man may have great opportunities and yet lose them. Uncontrolled passions might make a very little otherwise what might have been great." Isn't that true? Haven't you seen people who had great potential and they made a decision and it utterly ruined their lives? I mean, you can look at tons of pastors who, unfortunately may have got into adultery with other women, or you could look at tons of men that, were around the finances and they took some of them, or you could look at different things, all these different scenarios where people had an uncontrolled lust, an uncontrolled desire for something, and it took someone who should have been great and made them very little. And it can happen to any person. When we say, I wouldn't do that, be weary. Genesis 49, 5 through 7, we start talking about Simeon and Levi. Theirs are together, which is really interesting. Theirs don't get any separation, even within 3 words, Simeon and Levi. So I'll read verse 5 if someone else can be ready to read verse 6 loud. Simeon and Levi are brethren, instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. In verse 7. Thank you. Sam, you got to read a little louder, man. All right. Yeah, so it said, "Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, I will scatter them in Israel." So Simeon and Levi received a combined section. This was a curse upon Simeon, but a blessing upon Levi. And we don't know that until later. If you ever look at a map of where Israel ended up being and who lived where, Simeon is enclosed on all sides around Judah. Like they're just a spot in the middle of Judah. They don't even get like their own full section. There's like this. And then Levi, on the other hand, is all over. Levi was blessed by siding with God when Israel and Mount Sinai had lived in a really lascivious way. They had worshipped a golden calf and they were having orgies with the people. And Levi stood up against them when Moses came back. And so Levi was blessed, and instead of getting land for their inheritance, they were given God as their inheritance, which is really a lot better thing. So they are a good example of how the sins of the past may come back to haunt you. This is something, the reason they are talked about, the reason they are given this kind of curse on some level, is because in Genesis 34, they literally slew a city. Like they destroyed a city. So their sister had been defiled. Someone had raped their sister, which was awful. And what happens is they now come forth and they convince the people, hey, if you go get circumcised, because that guy wants to marry his sister now. He says, if you guys all go get circumcised, we will make you a part of our group. And the idea is it's been a couple days. They're at the sorest point. It may even be that there's an infection going on. And they went in and they killed all of the men of the city. And that section that says they dig down a wall, a more literal translation of that would be hamstrung an ox. The idea is they had no mercy whatsoever. They came in and they decimated the place. And so when they get this prophecy, this blessing upon them, it is basically saying, like, I have not forgotten what you did, neither has God. And so Simeon is within the land of Judah. Levi gets put all over the place. They don't actually get their own land. But they are a good example of the sins of the past coming back to haunt you. And they can. In Genesis 49, 8 through 12, we get the one section that everybody knows about in the blessings. Judah. Judah's the one. Everyone's like, all right, yeah, I know that passage because Judah's a lion's whelp, or, things like that. There's a lawgiver. What's the name we get in Genesis 49 that everyone's like, oh, Shiloh. Everyone's like, oh, Shiloh, till Shiloh comes. It's not actually a name, but we'll get to that. Somebody read verse 8 loud, please. Yeah. So they're going to be a warring people. It says, thy father's children shall bow down before thee. So they're going to be the leaders. They're finding that out. They're going to be the ones that are in charge. Verse 9. Yeah, Judah is referenced as a lion in this verse. In verse 10, it says, the scepter shall not depart out of Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So there's a lawgiver, there's a leader, there's someone who's going to come from Judah who's going to be this ultimate leader, referenced here as Shiloh. Verse 11, somebody read it. It says, his eyes shall be red with wine and his teeth white milk. Judah, in this section, is given the rulership of the people. Remember, Reuben is not going to be the social leader of the group. He is the oldest, but he is not obviously a very good leader. But as we've been walking through the passages, you see time and time again, even though Judah messes things up and makes some really bad mistakes, like he did with Tamar, like he did with being the one who suggested to get rid of Joseph, Judah is the leader of the group, for better or for worse. And Judah makes good decisions too. He leads the brothers, and he becomes surety for Benjamin. He decides he'll take Benjamin's place as a prisoner, as a servant for Joseph when Joseph was trying to officially take Benjamin. And he's the one who leads the family in when they come into the land of Goshen. He's very obviously the one leading the group. But see, the most important information in Judah's blessing is that he is the one, it references Judah as a lion that would have Shiloh. The word Shiloh literally means the one who has the right to rule. Who is the one who has the right to rule? Jesus Christ. And Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Now, you have to know, these prophecies took hundreds of years. Israel does not have a king for at least another 600 years. Jesus didn't come for like another, 14 to 1600 years. You know what I'm saying? It's 16 to 17. But the concept is like there is a lot of time before these things are fulfilled. We get very impatient. God, you said if I asked you for something, you'd give it to me. Where is it? Well, Abraham had to wait 25 years. Judah's future blessing took between 600 to 1600 years. I don't think he's going to make you wait that long. You won't still be here. But the idea is we have to be patient and let God do things on God's timetable, because that's what he's going to do. And obviously we know that through Judah comes the Messiah. The next one we're going to look at is Zebulun. Somebody read Genesis 49:13. Yeah, Zebulun will be at the haven of the sea. It will be a haven for ships. His border will be Zidon. Zebulun's blessing seems to reference where his clan would be later. They are the people that are going to be on the edge of the on Israel, right next to the water. If I'm not mistaken, they also have a lot of troops. They would be a good warring clan later, and they need to be if they're going to be on the border of Zidon. So Genesis 49:14 and 15, I'm going to read this section. It says, Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens. And he saw that the rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant unto people. I need you to understand Issachar was a large and a strong tribe, but often people would be captured or put into servitude or put as tribute there. It was one of the places that was beaten up a lot, which is kind of funny. But Leopold had an interesting statement on this. He said, the meaning of this seems to be that Issachar was strong but docile and lazy. He would enjoy the good of the land assigned to him, but he would not strive for it. Therefore, eventually, he would be pressed into servitude and the mere bearing of burdens for his masters. And that's what ended up happening with Issachar. I'm going to keep reading. We're running low on time. Dan shall judge his people. As one of the tribes of Israel, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, one that biteth the horse heels, and the rider shall fall backwards. He said, I've waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Dan did judge his people. By the way, his name is God is my judge. That's what that means. As a matter of fact, Dan had one of the most famous judges in all the Bible, Samson. Not that that was everybody's favorite judge, but he is one of the most famous. And he did judge his people. Now, something else to know, as time went on, Dan, the place, became a hotbed for idolatry. When the kingdom split, one of the golden calves that were made for the people to worship was put up in Dan, and it became a center place for idolatry. Some people believe that's why it's not referenced in Revelation, in the listing of the 12 tribes specifically. The snake coming and biting the heel of the people in the path, specifically the horse heel, so that the rider should fall. Some people think that means that the Antichrist is coming from the tribe of Dan. I don't know that that's true, but that is an argument that some people will make. So Dan is a really interesting group of people. Genesis 49:19, you get to Gad. It said, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall be overcome at the last. Gad was one of the groups that were really good at fighting. They were fighting troops. Unfortunately, they were not initially the winners normally, but they would come through in the end. And Spurgeon said, this has been a blessing of many child of God to fight. Apparently, they lose a battle, but yet they win at the end of it. And even if we fight our whole lives, losing things here and there, if we know Christ, who wins? We do, because we have Christ. Genesis 49:20 says, out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and ye shall yield royal dainties. So Asher was a land of blessings, both in necessities, but also more so in luxury items, royal dainties. Then let's look at Naphtali. Naphtali is a hind loose, he giveth goodly words. So Naphtali's blessing actually seems to be in reference more to what Jesus would later do in Galilee. It seems like this tribe was remembered for nothing more than the blessing that would come in the future, that it would be a place of goodly words. And think about, Jesus did a lot of his preaching up in Galilee. Jesus did a lot of his time in Galilee, and what better words are there than the gospel? You know, I pray if we were to have a testimony in our community, that it would be, we give goodly words, that being the gospel, the good news. Now, we are going to get to Joseph. Joseph is not the last one on the list, but he has a big section like Judah. It says, his bow abode in strength, and his arms and the hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, even by the God of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of the heaven above. Blessings of the deep that lieth under, the blessings of breasts in the womb, and the blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors to the utmost. Bound of the everlasting hills, they shall be on the head of Joseph, and on a crown for the head of him that was separate from his brethren. So Joseph was fruitful, he was blessed, he was used by God, and we can see that very obviously. He was afflicted but not destroyed, like the shooting of the arrows came to him, but he sufficed through. The interesting portion of his thing about Joseph is Joseph's life gave Jacob a fuller understanding of the God that he served. Look at all the titles he gives to God. He says, the mighty God of Jacob. This is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, the God of my father, the Almighty. He's grown in his knowledge of who God is. If you're familiar at all with God visiting Joseph, God, when he visited Joseph the first time, he said, this is the house of God. But as you continue the chapter, he says, if you take care of me for my life, I will follow you. That was his answer to God when he had that vision. He said, if you lead me back home safely, if you take care of me while I'm away, I'll follow you. And then when you get to Genesis 30, the way he references God is, this is the God of my fathers. I think we can fall into something like that today. Sometimes we worship God because this was the God of our fathers. Sometimes we worship God in a not very personal way. And that's really the opposite of what now comes from Joseph's life. Because in Joseph's life, we saw the faithfulness of God very specifically on Joseph. And now in hindsight, Jacob can look back and he can see, this is God, my shepherd. This is God, the stone, the one that cannot be moved. Think about all the times, I think it happened in this morning's sermon, maybe the rock of offense, or maybe it was something I was talking to last night about it. But he is the stone, the rock of offense. He is God Almighty. He's God of thy father. He's no longer Abraham and Isaac's God. Now this is my God. And it's a cool way to see how this has translated. Joseph and his life give Israel the hindsight to see God working through Joseph's birth, because remember, his mom was barren, all the way to this faithful protecting of his family by being separated from them. And finally, Genesis 49:27, it says, Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and he shall at night divide the spoil. Benjamin was the youngest. Remember, he's the babied one, which is really funny because he probably would have been in his mid-30s when that was going on. Couldn't imagine. I'm not even in my mid-30s yet, but I'm imagining my mom being like, no, don't take my boy. My dad wouldn't say that. So he'd be like, get out. But Benjamin was a fighting force. Benjamin is known as some of the best fighters in Israel. I told you before, they were capable of fighting very well with the right and left hand. They were ambidextrous. They could shoot their bow with both hands. They could throw slings with both hands. They were immense warriors. Even the first king of Israel, the warrior king, was from the tribe of Benjamin. Jacob's final instruction about his death, he charged them, he said to them, gather me, bury me where my parents were buried. I'm going to just abbreviate that. Interestingly enough, and I don't know if anyone else picked up on this, he doesn't ask to be buried with Rachel. He asked to be buried with Leah. The one who is not the favorite wife is the one that he's going to now spend with his body next to for the rest of eternity. It was also his first wife, though, so I don't know. To end this out, I want you to see Jacob end his life with faith toward God and God's promises. Today, we have to look at these blessings and understand, although they're not about us, they hold a lot of truth for us. So ask yourself these questions. Will my passions, my uncontrolled self, disqualify me from the giftings God has given me? Is the anger we have, is it self-willed? Is it controlling us? Or can we be angry and sin not? Can we wait for God's promises to be fulfilled even if they don't happen when we think they should? Are we strong but lazy and then put ourselves under the yoke of others? Will we be known for being righteous judges or snakes in the way? Are we prepared to lose battles but win the war with God? Will we be people in a place of goodly words? Do we increase the faith of others, or do our lives hinder them and cause them to falter? And finally, are you growing in your knowledge and interactions with God? Are you at church just worshiping the God of your fathers? Is he personal to you? Today, that is the lesson. We are late, and there are people waiting in the hallway, so we're going to call it at that. Don't forget, we've got 1 o'clock. We've got the meeting at the E-Steps. Again, that is 1700 River Ridge. Love to have you guys come out. No, he doesn't. Bob? Okay, pray for Bob. Bob's got COVID. It is Spring Valley, yes. Don't forget to look that up. And when it's River Ridge Road, it's in Spring Valley. Thank you. I did say that at the beginning.